Okay, so picture the scene. It's the 8th century, and you are standing right in the middle of the intellectual explosion that is early Islamic history.
Oh yeah, the true formative period.
Right. It's basically the Champions League of theology and law. You have these absolute giants walking the earth, figures like Imam Malik in Medina or Abu Hanifa over in Iraq.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the founding fathers of the legal systems that millions of people still follow today. Their names are literally carved into the architecture of history.
Exactly. But then you look at our sources for this deep dive, and you have this other figure. He is based in Egypt. And here's the glitch in the matrix. Imam al-Shafi'i, who is arguably the most influential legal theorist in history, looks at this Egyptian scholar and says, on the record, he says, this man is actually more knowledgeable than Imam Malik.
Which, just to pause there for a second, that is a massive statement. I mean, Imam Malik was known as the Imam of the abode of migration. He was the gold standard.
The ultimate authority.
Yeah, so for Shafi'i to rank someone above him, that's not just a casual compliment. That's a direct challenge to the whole hierarchy.
Right. But here is the kicker for you listening. You look around today and you see the Maliki school, the Shafi school, the Hanafi school. But this guy's school, it's gone. It is completely vaporized.
It's like an entire intellectual kingdom just sank into the ocean.
It really is. So today we are talking about the lost Imam of Egypt, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd.
And this is such a great topic because it's one of the ultimate what-ifs of history. If a few minor variables had changed back then, the religious map of the entire world might look completely different right now.
So our mission for this deep dive isn't just to do a basic biography. We've got a huge stack of sources here. Everything from classical biographical dictionaries like Al-Dahabi and Ibn Khaldun to modern academic papers on early Islamic law.
And some pretty sharp critical perspectives too.
Yeah, those taboo questions. We need to figure out why this man who outclassed the giants essentially disappeared from the institutional map. And we're going to have to tackle some uncomfortable stuff to do that. Money, politics, and the really specific reasons why some ideas survive and others just die.
Let's start with the man himself, who was Al-Layth ibn Sa'd. Because looking at his profile, he really doesn't fit the typical mold of an Arab scholar from that era.
He doesn't at all. He was born around 713 CE, so that's 94 AH, in a place called Kalkashanda in Egypt. But immediately we hit this interesting demographic detail in the sources. He wasn't ethnically Arab.
Right, his family origins actually trace back to Isfahan in Persia.
So he was a mullah, right, like a client.
Exactly, he was a mullah of the Fam tribe. Now you have to remember that in the early Umayyad period, being a non-Arab convert, or the descendant of converts, usually meant you were essentially a second-class citizen when it came to political power.
The Arabs definitely held the reins of the state.
They did. But the intellectual sphere was evolving differently. It's becoming a real meritocracy. Al-Layth integrates fully into the Arab-Egyptian elite, and he rises to become the chief mufti of Egypt.
Now, when the sources say chief mufti, was that an actual official government title back then with a salary or just a reputation?
It wasn't a bureaucratic title like we think of today with stamp papers and an office.
Yeah.
It meant he was the unshakable reference point. If you had a legal question in Fustat or Alexandria in the mid-8th century, Al-Layth was the final word.
So he had real authority.
Absolute authority. He sat right at the intersection of the government and the people. I mean, if the governor of Egypt had a complex problem, he went to Al-Layth.
But the thing that really distinguishes him, and honestly the thing that makes him controversial even in our source material, is his bank account.
Right.
We have to talk about this wealth paradox.
Of the money.
Yeah. Because usually when we hear about a pious 8th century scholar, we picture someone fasting, wearing patched clothes, maybe living in a mud hut.
Right, the ascetic ideal. But Al-Layth completely shatters that image. He is basically the defining contradiction of his age. The sources, especially Ibn Khaldun, report his annual income was somewhere around 20,000 dinars.
Just to contextualize that for you, what does 20,000 dinars actually mean in the 8th century?
Well, a single dinar was a gold coin. A middle-class family could easily survive on a few dinars a month. 20,000 is, it's corporate CEO money.
It's insane wealth.
Generational wealth. He owned massive agricultural estates. He was heavily involved in international trade, honey, oil, grain. He was an absolute economic powerhouse.
Okay, so he's incredibly rich. But here's the thing that really confuses me in the notes. Al-Layth was a multimillionaire basically, yet reports say he never paid zakat. And zakah is the obligatory alms tax. If you are that rich, aren't you the primary target for zakat? Was he using a tax haven?
It sounds super suspicious, doesn't it? But no, he wasn't dodging it at all.
Yeah.
This is where the actual legal understanding comes into play. In Islamic law, zakat is due on wealth that sits in your possession for a full lunar year.
The lunar year.
Right.
Yeah, so Al-Layth never paid it because he never held on to the money for a full year. He literally gave it all away before the clock ran out.
Wait, so he was earning 20,000 dinars and spending 20,000 dinars?
Every single year. He funded students, he paid off massive debts for people in the community, and he famously ran what was essentially a daily soup kitchen for the intellectual elite and the poor alike.
That is wild.
There's this amazing story in the sources where a woman asked him for a small jar of honey for her sick son. And he sent her a huge barrel of honey. When his assistant asked why he went so overboard, he just said, "She asked according to her need, I gave according to my means."
Okay, that's a fantastic line. But I do want to push back on this a little bit based on our critical sources. Usually in this era, if a scholar is that rich, it's because they are uncomfortably close to the power structure. They're taking massive stipends from the caliph.
A court scholar.
Exactly. Was he bought and paid for by the state? That is the accusation critics often raise. And it's a totally valid suspicion. History is packed with clerics who just rubber stamp government policy for a paycheck. But the historical consensus across all our sources on Al-Layth is actually the complete opposite. His wealth was his shield.
Because he didn't need their money?
Precisely. Because he had his own independent revenue streams from the land and the trade, he didn't need a dime from the government. There's a really famous incident where the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur, and Al-Mansur was not a man you said no to, easily invited Al-Layth to come to Baghdad to take up a high position.
Basically to become part of the central administration.
Yeah, to be the state's guy. And Al-Layth refused. He just stayed in Egypt. If he were chasing power or influence, he would have jumped at the chance to be in the capital. But his money gave him the leverage to stay on the periphery and just do his own thing.
He couldn't be bought because he's already richer than the guy trying to buy him?
In a way, yes. It totally insulated him from the pressure to conform to whatever the state's narrative was at the time.
Okay, so we have the man and we have the money. Now let's get to the mind.
You mentioned he was a rival of Imam Malik. And this wasn't just a personality clash, right? This is a fundamental clash of methodologies.
This is the clash of titans. To really understand Al-Layth, you have to understand what he was pushing back against. Imam Malik, who was based in Medina, championed a concept called Amal al-Medina, the practice of the people of Medina.
Break that down for us. Why does the practice of the people matter more than, say, a written text?
Malik's argument was essentially sociological. He said, look, the Prophet lived here. His companions lived here. Their kids lived here. If the entire community of Medina does something a certain way, whether that's how they pray or how they conduct a business transaction, that mass behavior is a living transmission.
A living tradition.
Exactly. For Malik, that living tradition is stronger proof than a single isolated hadith text that might say otherwise.
It's like saying if everyone in the neighborhood has been doing it this way for a century, it must be right, even if we don't have a specific written memo about it. Right. Malik viewed Medina as this pristine time capsule.
Yeah.
But Al-Layth, he respected Medina immensely, but he completely rejected that they had a monopoly on the truth.
What was his counter-argument?
Al-Layth's view was that the living tradition had fractured. He argued that the Prophet's companions didn't just stay in Medina. They went to Iraq to lead armies, they went to Syria to govern, they came to Egypt, and they took the Sunnah of the Prophet's way with them everywhere they went.
So he's saying Medina doesn't own the copyright on Islam.
Yes, perfectly said. He's saying that by the 8th century, the truth is decentralized. You can't just look at your neighbors in Medina and say, this is the law. You have to look at the texts, the hadith that were transmitted globally.
Because the texts survived the travel.
Right. If a companion in Egypt narrated a hadith that contradicts the practice of the people in Medina, Al-Layth said, we have to follow the text, not the local custom.
And this massive disagreement culminated in a very famous letter, didn't it? I was reading the excerpts of it in our source material, and the tone is, I mean, it's a masterclass in diplomacy, but it's also just brutal.
It is a masterpiece of passive-aggressive politeness. It's honestly one of the most important documents in early legal history. Al-Layth writes to Malik, and remember, they were close friends, but he lists over 70 specific points where he thinks Malik is dead wrong.
70? That's a lot of disagreements to mail to a friend.
Over 70. And he systematically dismantles the Medina practice argument. He'll say things like, you and your companions do such and such, but I have found reliable reports from the companions in Syria or Egypt that say the exact opposite. He is asserting the absolute primacy of text over local custom.
It sounds like he was acting as a check on regionalism, like he was trying to prevent the religion from just becoming the localized custom of Medina.
That's a great way to put it. He was pushing for a more universal text-based standard rather than a culturally localized one. And yet, and this is why their relationship is so fascinating to study, while he was writing this devastating intellectual critique, he was simultaneously sending Malik massive financial gifts.
I saw that in the notes, reports of him sending 1,000 dinars at a time to Medina.
Yeah, it illustrates a level of intellectual maturity that is honestly pretty rare. They could have a ferocious debate about the absolute fundamentals of law, but personally, they were brothers. Al-Layth essentially subsidized Malik's students while actively critiquing Malik's ideas. He separated the idea from the person.
So if Al-Layth was this brilliant, if he had the money, the independence, and the superior arguments according to Shafi, we have to answer the central mystery of this deep dive. Why are there no Laythists today? Why did the school vanish?
It's a convergence of a few fatal factors. The most famous explanation comes from al-Shafi himself. He said Alice was more learned than Malik, but his companions wasted him.
Wasted him. That is so harsh. It sounds like he's just blaming the students for being lazy.
It is harsh, but there is a lot of truth to it from an institutional perspective. Building a school of law, a Madhhab, isn't just about having a really smart teacher. It's about infrastructure.
Right, it's an organization.
Yeah, and Malik had students who were fiercely dedicated to scribing. They wrote down his every ruling. They codified his loose lectures into a rigid system. Al-Layth's students, on the other hand, they respected him, they learned a ton from him, but they didn't do the administrative grunt work of codification.
So it was essentially a failure of documentation?
Documentation methodology. Malik wrote the Muwatta, which is the earliest surviving major book of Islamic law. It was a textbook. Al-Layth didn't leave a definitive manual like that, and if you don't have a textbook, you can't teach the next generation in a standardized way. The knowledge essentially evaporates when the students die.
But surely politics plays a huge role here too, right? Ideas don't just win purely on merit. They win because someone in power likes them and enforces them.
Oh, absolutely. Legal schools usually survive long-term because the government adopts them. The Abbasids and later dynasties heavily favored the Hanafis, or the Shafis. Spain and North Africa adopted the Maliki school.
They became the state law.
Right. Without state patronage to hire judges from your specific school, the school just loses relevance. The Laythi school had the brilliant founder, but it just didn't have a political patron to enforce its survival.
It's such a powerful lesson in institution building. Just being the smartest guy in the room isn't enough. You need the system, the book, and the bureaucracy.
Content needs a container. Al-Layth had the best content, but he had no container.
Okay, I want to pivot now. This is where we get into the real weeds of our sources. We have this list of taboo questions. These are critical interrogations of the tradition, looking at Al-Layth through the lens of modern skepticism, sectarian critiques, and sociology. I want to throw these at you, and I want the unvarnished analysis from the research, no glossing over the tricky parts.
Let's do it. History shouldn't be fragile.
First up is the sectarian critique. This often comes from Shia scholarship or more critical historians. Al-Layth is a key narrator of hadith. He's foundational. But he wasn't part of the Al-Bayt, the family of the Prophet. He was part of the establishment. So the question is, did he suppress pro-Ali traditions? Was he actively filtering the data to suit the Sunni narrative?
This is a sensitive but really crucial question to ask. Now, the standard Sunni defense in the biographical dictionaries is that Al-Layth is thika, universally trustworthy. They argue he transmitted exactly what he heard, regardless of the politics.
Okay, but what about the critical historian view?
If we put on our historian hats, we have to look at his network. He studied under al-Zuri, who was a massive scholar but was also heavily associated with the Umayyad court. And the Umayyads, frankly, were the political enemies of the family of the Prophet.
So he might not have been deleting emails, so to speak, but he was only on a certain mailing list?
That's the most nuanced view of the sources. It wasn't necessarily active malice or a conspiracy to hide the truth. It was geography and access. He narrated from the teachers available to him in Egypt and Syria.
Which were Umayyad strongholds.
Exactly. Those networks naturally contain fewer pro-Ali narrations than, say, a network in Kufa over in Iraq, where Shi'ism was very strong. So his data set was skewed by his location, even if his personal integrity was totally intact.
Hey, next one. This is the big one for modern audiences looking back at the 8th century, gender and social norms. Al-Layth transmitted laws regarding women, slavery, corporal punishments. Did he endorse things that we would find abhorrent today?
The short objective answer from the sources is yes. He transmitted the legal corpus of his time. This included the legality of slavery, the permissibility of concubinage, and specific restrictions on women's movement. There was no historical way to modernize him out of that. He was an 8th century jurist operating completely within an 8th century framework.
So how do we grapple with that when analyzing his legacy? Do we just write him off as archaic?
Well, we have to look at the whole picture to be fair to the history. While he upheld the general structures of his time, he also transmitted and ruled on rights that were highly progressive for that specific era.
Like what?
He was known for fiercely upholding women's property rights and their rights to seek divorce in court, things which were often ignored by local patriarchal custom.
So he wasn't just cherry-picking the oppressive stuff?
No, not at all.
Sure.
And importantly, remember his methodology. He favored text over custom. Local Egyptian custom might have been much more patriarchal than the strict letter of the Hadith.
Ah, I see.
By sticking strictly to the text, he sometimes bypassed misogynistic cultural habits entirely. For example, ensuring women received their full inheritance when local tribes might have wanted to keep all the wealth with the men. So it's complicated. He's certainly not a modern feminist, but he wasn't a villain either. He was a strict textualist.
Third critique, the epistemological problem. This is what secular or atheist critics often call the telephone game argument. We are basing immense legal structures on things Al-Layth heard from a guy who heard from a guy who heard from the Prophet 150 years prior. How can we trust this isn't just hearsay?
This is where the concept of isnad, the chain of transmission, comes in. It's very easy for a modern skeptic to dismiss it as a telephone game, but that completely ignores the extreme rigor of the system. Al-Layth wasn't just casually chatting at the market. This was a peer-reviewed academic discipline.
But how so? It's still an oral tradition at its core, isn't it?
It started oral, but by Al-Layth's time, it was actively being written down in complex notebooks. They had these massive biographical dictionaries that vetted every single person in the chain. Was his memory good? Was he known to lie? Did he actually physically meet the person he claimed to hear from?
So they were tracking the metadata of the transmission.
Exactly. And Al-Layth was a massive node in this network. He wrote things down, he cross-referenced.
So he was basically like a verifier node in a blockchain?
A verifier node in a blockchain. That is a perfect way to look at it. Even modern Western academics like Harold Motsky, who apply rigorous historical critical methods and don't just accept religious claims on faith, have deeply analyzed these chains.
And what do they find?
They conclude that you can't just dismiss them as fiction. There is a traceable, highly consistent structure to the transmission. Al-Layth is often the link that proves a hadith existed in Egypt early on, completely separate from the Medina version.
So he serves as a cross-check for the whole system. If his Egyptian chain matches the Iraqi chain, then the source is validated.
Exactly. He validates the data integrity for the entire region.
Let's zoom out as we wrap up this deep dive. We've got a dead school, an incredibly rich scholar, and a legacy that is mostly hidden in the footnotes. Why does this matter? Why should you listening, who might not be a historian or a theologian, care about Al-Layth ibn Sa'd today?
I think there are three major takeaways from all our sources. First, it shatters the illusion of a monolithic Islam. We tend to think the rules have always been the rules. But Al-Layth proves that early Islam was a vibrant, competitive marketplace of ideas. There were other options. There were other ways of thinking that were just as valid, but simply lost the political lottery.
It really opens up the imagination. It shows that diversity of thought is actually the core of the tradition.
Second, it's a powerful story of regional agency. It puts Egypt on the map as a major producer of knowledge, not just a consumer. It challenges the total centrality of Medina and Iraq in the historical narrative.
And finally,
the survival of data versus metadata. The school of Layth, the brand, the metadata that died, but the data itself, the thousands of hadiths he narrated, the rulings he gave, they survived. He is cited constantly in Bukhari, in Muslim, in Malik's own Muwatta. He's running quietly in the background of Sunni Islam today, even if the user interface doesn't flash his name.
He's the back-end code.
He is the ultimate open source contributor whose code is running in the kernel, even though he didn't launch his own branded operating system.
That is a really powerful image. And I guess the practical lesson for us and for you listening is the one we touched on earlier with his students.
Write it down.
Seriously, if Al-Layth's students had just organized those notes, if they had built the institution, the legal map of the world might be entirely different.
It really forces you to ask a tough question. What brilliant solutions, what profound insights are floating around right now in conversations or lectures that are going to vanish simply because nobody is doing the grunt work of documenting them?
We are absolutely drowning in content today, but are we actually preserving knowledge? That is the question we'll leave you to mull over.
It's a haunting thought.
Thanks for taking this trip back to 8th century Egypt with us. Keep exploring, keep questioning the sources, and for heaven's sake, take some notes. We'll see you on the next deep dive.